Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, everybody, and thanks for dialing in again on Conversations on Retail, the Asset Protection and Risk Mitigation series. Most of the listeners know who I am anyway, so I'm not going to bore you with my background. Brand Elverston, 22 years at Walmart Corporate and now in strategic retail technology consulting. And this month, we're fortunate to have whom a lot of people probably do know, at least from media, David Johnston. David, I'll give you a second to give your rundown, but David is the top asset protection guy for the National Retail Federation, which obviously everybody on the call knows who they are. But it's kind of unique, as I always introduce my guest, David. You're unique in that you were a practitioner for a lot of years, and now you're on the trade organization side. So you have that firsthand experience balance where oftentimes that's not the case. You have people that have never really been in the industry, but always pressing the nose against the glass, looking the outside in. But you've been there and done that. So take a couple minutes, David, and give us a rundown on your background, and then we'll kick it off.
Great. Well, Brand, thank you very much for having me on the podcast with you today, and real great pleasure to speak with someone who's done quite a bit for the industry himself. As you'd mentioned, I am the Vice President of Asset Protection and Retail Operations for the National Retail Federation. I've been with them since November of 2022. But as you also mentioned, I actually started in the retail industry as a part-time salesperson in retail, and then moved to my first role as a store detective about 37 years ago with a major department store in Massachusetts. And then built my career in retail asset protection and loss prevention, but not only on the practitioner side, which was probably my first, 8 or 10 years, but then through an opportunity where the organization I was with, Jay Baker, we took the proprietary LP or the in-house LP department, and our senior VP actually turned that organization into a consulting and outsourcing firm called LP Innovations, which still does exist today under different leadership.
Wow.
But overnight, we went from being asset protection practitioners for a single retail company to solution providers and industry partners and consultants and outsourcers. And then for the next 15 years with a couple of other organizations, I was on the solution provider side. So as I like to say, on the other side of the carpet, in conferences. And then in 2014, I went back as a practitioner to lead the Dunkin' brand, so the Dunkin' and Baskin-Robbins global safety, security, and fraud teams, and was with them through their acquisition with Inspire Brands, which ended up with about 32,000 restaurants, 65 countries. And then decided to take my all my experience on both sides of the carpet and serve the industry in the current role today with the NRF.
Wow. Okay. And for some of the listeners that may not be retailers, and David, we have a pretty broad audience, academics, technicians, DOD, some government people that listen overseas as well as here in the U.S. So there'll be times that I want to expand on something. You'll probably be thinking, dude, I got it. But just for those listeners that may not know, the retail trade organizations in the retail industry are really our champions for the audience of helping us either in legislative initiatives, visibility initiatives. They are really our champions in the face of the broader retail industry to be able to affect real change. So, it's no secret, and we'll talk about it here in a minute, what's dominating all the headlines, the organized retail crime, the violence, the active shooter scenarios in retail, safety, all of that add complexity to exactly what the retail and wholesale agendas look like. And it's people like David that really take all of those independent components, throw it in a blender, and get a clear strategy to pursue to help move the needle forward. So David, you're pretty humble. You went through that pretty quick, but it's a major deal to have these levels, because in the absence of that, really the only megaphone that retail has is the business roundtable. So my background, Doug McMillan's on it. I don't know if Brian Cornell's on it, but really that's it. And not that, by design, the agenda would be different at that level. You can help us focus on those things that are more laser focused on the risk mitigation component of retail rather than some of the social issues that are providing challenges across the board. So it's a big deal, guys, to be able to have David on here. He's been all over the press, good, bad, and indifferent, as he said when we opened up. But that's life in the big city. Not everybody's going to be happy. But we wanted to talk with David today, number one, because he has first person relationships with all the key leaders in retail, from Walmart all the way to every level you want to name, whether it's, I don't think y'all do a lot of independent grocers, do you, David? Are they any members at independent level?
We do. We have members who are large national and international brands, all the way down to independent business owners, small business owners,
Awesome.
across all the segments. So we're
Okay.
talking retail, grocery, restaurants. When you get into retail, it's everything from specialty to mass merchants. So we have, well over 1,000 retail members, supported all across everything in the U.S. and even beyond our shores.
That gives you a good balance. And we'll talk a little bit more also because, most well, that's a bit of a stretch. So a lot of the major companies do have an international presence. So while the risk mitigation channels may be a bit partitioned, in other words, my experience at Walmart, and I'm going to share a lot of that, all we did was US. So we did shrink in the stores, all the strategies in the US stores. On occasion, we'd collaborate with the international guys, so Walmart Canada, Walmart Asia, LATAM, EMEA, so on and so forth. But really, those were isolated, because we certainly had enough challenges here in the U.S. to keep us busy. But it did provide, in the case when we had ASDA, for example, and in a lot of people's opinions of ASDA, they brought a lot to the table during that acquisition. And it was before 2000, I think. They're an awesome company. They're buttoned up. They had a lot of efficiencies that helped Walmart US elevate. And then I've forgotten when they spun ASDA off, but there's still close relationships. So there are strategies and things that that are not challenged by geographical boundaries. Crooks are crooks. Certain things, it's the same no matter where you go. So you've been in the industry. I have it pegged at 1988. Is that correct?
Just about 1987.
Okay. All right. And we'll start with a macro view. What, in your mind, in the risk mitigation component of retail, has really changed, good and bad, from your first day running down shoplifters to where you are today? Because that's what, 35 years, somewhere in that neighborhood.
Right. Well, before I do answer that, I do want to go back to your last point of conversation with the NRF, because that's exactly what the NRF and trade associations are all about. It's convening retailers around similar issues and challenges that, without a trade association, they may have to take those fights upon themselves, and they still do. But it allows, my role is to be the voice of the collective industry. And where they may not be able to speak for themselves and provide details, I can gather benchmarking and information and conversations and even expand the view, as you had even said, across our borders. So, the NRF is involved in FIRA, which is an international retail trade group of number of different countries. I talk to peers in other retail councils like the RCC in Canada to see what are the similarities and differences, and so forth. So it is our role, and particularly my role when it comes to my area of responsibility, to try to be that collective source and that collective voice, for the group. And, going back to your immediate question, there's a lot going on today in the retail industry, and looking back throughout my career, I'll start with retail itself. I started in retail where we were really just brick and mortar and catalog and mail order. The internet did not exist. Even accepting credit cards were done with paper.
Oh, I remember the
You,
slider thing with the
the
carbon
slider.
paper.
That's right. That's right. And gift cards didn't exist. They were gift
Yep,
certificates. They were a piece of paper that if you lost it, you were
you're out.
you're out. So, starting back there in the mid 80s, there's a lot that's changed in the retail environment. We saw the advent of the internet, which brought e-commerce and omni-channel. We saw catalog move away and in for e-commerce. During the pandemic, we saw, buy online, pick up in store, and a convergence between the two. And we saw the rise of cybercrime and cyber criminal activity, gift card fraud, and of course, organized retail crime. And shoplifting is not new. It happened prior to your existence and my existence.
Yep.
I go back again to my first role, even at the department store in downtown Boston. We had professional shoplifters. We had local professionals who would go to clubs and bars and take orders and then come and try to steal the high-priced, high-fashion merchandise. We had groups from South America who were coming up across the border and stealing merchandise and taking that merchandise back and selling it in their own country. So, what we're seeing today did exist with regards to the merchandise theft. But today, it is completely different. It's almost like we now have what I consider a third level of shoplifting. There was always the opportunistic and amateur shoplifters stealing for need, addicted, homeless, teenagers. There was always the professional. But now we have those folks who are really stealing for greed and stealing to support almost themselves as an independent business of shoplifters. And
Yep.
I'm sure we'll get deep into that in our conversation as to why that's taking place. But, our theft landscape has changed, our threat landscape has changed, and our risk landscape has definitely changed in retail as we start to look at everything in a more omni-channel environment, in a smaller world where the world is more connected and impacted by events that happen beyond our own independent, nation's borders. And this is where I look at it, and I know many of the leaders in the LPAP world look at it and say, hey, there's a lot more to loss prevention, asset protection today than there was in the past.
Mm-hmm.
And
Indeed.
I like to talk about it that it's really that enterprise security risk management, philosophy. But today we're being challenged with issues of safety. You want to talk top of mind? Safety is number one on the top of mind of everyone from an asset protection person to CEO. Our CEO, Matt Shea, he goes into conversations with other CEOs. It's the safety. It's the violence that's impacting the stores. That's due to the rise in the theft that we're starting to see. And, the theft is most certainly indeed a component of a number of factors. But one that is definitely up there in the list now is the ability for thieves to organize and coordinate and to have various layers and scales of this organization that starts from the local level all the way to the transnational level.
It's funny you mentioned, in my relationships with, the good thing about the retail industry is, it's a close-knit group in the AP/LP industry. So, Mike Lamb, former boss of mine at Walmart, Paul Jekyll at Meyer, former boss of mine at Walmart, Gary Smith at Target, former boss of mine at Walmart. So we've either know each other through trade group, serving on committees and boards, or we've worked with each other. And in it's almost 30 years now in retail. You bring up a great point. Never was safety the number one priority in my time in retail. It was always shrink. Safety was in the top three, and it was more about slip, trip, and falls, and pallets falling off the green steel or whatever. It wasn't about how do you convince your associates when they come to work they're probably not going to get shot. takes on a completely different dimension. You see all the gangs coming in. I think it was Nordstrom's or Macy's, the one that was all over the internet, coming in just wholesale, whatever they want, out the door it goes. But you're right. It's number one is that safety component. Secondary to that is shrink. Do you feel like um, do you feel like safety has overshadowed the component of shrink? Because every retailer on the map is probably staring at least 2x what their shrink was 5, 6 years ago. So do you think it overshadowed and that's kind of why we're in the mess we're in, or what's your theory on that?
Brent, I don't think it overshadows shrink. I think that, LP professionals, retailers are still focused on shrink.
Mm-hmm.
I think they have to, though. Over the last 3 years in particular, coming even prior to COVID, but definitely post COVID, there's been such an uptick in the frequency of theft. And the frequency of theft is, I know we're going to go back to the simplistic aspect of what we're talking about, which is shoplifting, but shoplifting used to be the invisible crime, right? It used to be something that, and again, going back my 30 plus years coming forward, it's, security guards used to be able to prevent it. And then you would conceal the merchandise and be a better shoplifter. So we had electronic article surveillance, EAS tags, but now you look at today's shoplifter and, as you had mentioned, they're going into department stores in groups. They're going in the middle of the day and they're going and stealing merchandise by the handfuls or loading up the shopping carts and just going right through any preventative or protective measures that exist, whether it be technology, whether it be some sort of systemic process, or whether it be a human element in the form of a security officer or an employee. And that last piece, unfortunately, is where we're starting to see the violence, take place. So no merchandise is of any value to a human life.
Yeah.
And I don't think anybody is going to ever question that. But when you're starting to see the incidents every single day, and these are the incidents that I hear repeatedly from our members, whether it be a mass merchant or whether it be a specialty retailer or even a local retailer in a community, you do have to put that focus and that attention on the safety of the employee first. I will say that after a certain period of time, I think LP departments they're dealing with a lot of stress right now. They're dealing with a lot of exhaustion trying to work this through. So, on the flip side of that, from a shrink perspective, there's a lot that's happened in the retail environment coming out of COVID. During COVID, a lot of retailers had to alter and change their entire environment to stay viable and fiscally healthy. Some went and implemented, buy online, pick up in store, customer pickups, things of that nature. I think we saw such an influx, a very fast influx of technologies that in some instances they were so disparate, and the data collection and the inability to track and maintain inventory has caused a lot of operational shrink over the last 2 years. That could be a factor as to why many are seeing that, that 2x. Even though I do still believe, internal theft, we always have to look at that as a factor as well. And that comes into play with a difficult and challenging economy, challenges with labor, what you're doing to hire and retain the best. So I still think we're dealing with a lot out there with regards to loss overall, but we have to look at that life and safety, or life safety is the number one, priority.
Yeah, couple of things and you're exactly right, and what I kind of bristle sometimes when I see in the press, that say, for example, Lululemon getting hammered for hands-off approach. And I'm like, when the hell is anything inside that building ever worth you jeopardizing anybody's life? That has never been okay. And, I remember back in the day at Walmart when we would have what we called in stores back then. the guys that caught shoplifters, and they'd make some bad decisions. They'd pursue people off the parking lot or whatever, and they'd get killed. And it really forced us into, what are the boundaries? This can't be the Wild West anymore, because for whatever reason, we're starting to see an escalation of violence, people getting stabbed when they bring them into the back room to question them or call the cops and all those things. So that component isn't new. That it just seems to make the circles in the press, and it appears new. Hands-off policies or de-escalation and things like that. And then you mentioned the technologies, and that is exactly on point. That during COVID, for a lot of understandable and justifiable reasons, there was an over-reliance on yet proven and maybe nascent technologies in the retail box, but they had to survive. So immediately, whenever it hit, what was that, 21, I guess, it was pretty much do or die. You either go on, buy online, pick up in store, curbside delivery, had people counting people at the doors, wouldn't let them in. People that traditionally had other jobs were now repurposed to wiping down merchandise back in the early stages, and understandably took their eye off less important priorities, which in a lot of cases are manual processes. So there was a definite over-reliance in my mind on technologies, and the gaps that existed before, or the manual processes, were all of a sudden not just being haphazardly performed, but now they're not performed at all. So for example, David, and I'm going to pick on Walmart, but this is not Walmart's plan. I'm not speaking for Walmart. But if I go into walmart.com and you're the order filler on shift, and I order something on walmart.com, and I get my order number or whatever my confirmation is, and I text you, and we're buddies, and we're going to the lake this weekend and need a couple of extra bottles of Jack Daniels and some other stuff. You're the order filler. Buy online, pick up in store has expanded significantly at most retailers. What's to stop David from throwing in a couple of bottles of Jack, a new video game, and whatever else? So, and again, that is not specific to Walmart, but those vulnerabilities that prior to COVID, we probably would have had enough headcount to manage the risks, to understand what those risks are. But it has greatly outpaced the technology availability. So not being parallel universes, the pace of technology development and implementation in store ops is way ahead of that of risk mitigation in a lot of cases. So the providers that are out there that can help in a narrow focus of AI, because I know when you go to a conference, everybody's doing AI, whether they're doing it or not. But there are players in there that are moving the needles. For example, Elverston, Ocucon on spill detect technology, Zero Eyes, active shooter. Give me a heads up when they're 100 feet out in the parking lot. Don't tell me after they've already killed 10 people. I need to know it ahead of time to react. So those kinds of things are making it to the scene. But it's a great point you bring up that COVID, in my estimation, was the single biggest stress test of everything a retailer did in my lifetime. I mean, it proved out what's got legs and what you just need to dump it. It's not going to work.
Right.
And last thing I'll say is, well, one final point in that conversation is that most retailers reduced, again, for understandable reasons, reduced headcount. So the wage per sales hour or per sale dollar probably went down significantly in most major retailers. And if you and I both been in retail, the finance guys get a hold of that and they're like, holy crap, we saved, $600 zillion and we still made it. And we still had comp increases. So why do we need all those people? Very unlikely to go back to pre-COVID staffing levels. So again, to your well-stated point, the hangover is still going on. We're still learning from what happened during COVID. And you hear all the earnings calls like everybody else. 2 quarters ago, it was holy crap, they stole it all. 2 quarters later, not so bad. So my question is on that analogy, it's not complacency, but are we retailers becoming now more aware and accepting of the new normal, meaning high shrink rates, or do you see us, when the dust settles, being able to get back to a more reasonable level? What's your sense with all your leadership?
Yeah, I think your term of a hangover is kind of a good one where, we kind of came out of, the pandemic with a lot of things hitting retailers at the same time. And, in your years of controlling shrink, you're very familiar with, there are things that you can control and there are things that are difficult and not in your control. And I do think that at the period of time, again, theft became out of control. And we're still dealing with that. And there are things that we need to do. I always take the saying from our CEO, Matt Shea, if theft today was a retailer only problem, it would have been solved by now.
Yeah.
When we talk about how we're going to deal with the theft and the violence that we're seeing in the retail stores, it's going to take an entire community effort, local, state, federal. It's going to involve legislation, partnerships, police work, prosecution. Even retailers still have stuff to do, as well as the consumer themselves in education and awareness. When it comes to the other aspects of shrink, I think there are still a lot of things that the retailers need to consider. Yes, we are having a very challenged labor market, whether that's, I'm going to say, self-inflicted on the retailer side by trying to, cut costs and maintain a certain level of fiscal health, whether it's bringing in some new technologies that could help to reposition labor, and maybe those new technologies are not yet refined in their processes. Yep. Self-checkout is one of those, I think, that we talk about regularly. But then the other piece to that is, I also think it's repositioning the LP/AP leader to have a seat at the earliest moment in time in those strategic discussions involving new technologies, new processes, and new positioning of the organization, because they are the ones that are best positioned to think about the risk, think about it from a different point of view and a different mindset, and be able to help identify what are some new ways or new challenges to overcome in that. We saw that with COVID. When we look at what happened with COVID, many LP folks, myself included, because I was an LP executive at that time, we were tapped on the shoulder to lead the initiative for the organizations with regards to COVID.
Yep.
But when the pandemic ended, how many of those LP/AP leaders felt as though they were put back at the kids' table or back into the glass?
Great point.
Glass cabinet for break when emergency. Yep. Right? And that's where I think for the LP/AP leaders, and I'm going to even extend it beyond, for the C-level folks and the leaders in retail, take the strengths, take the abilities, take the capabilities of your LP/AP leader and bring them into those early conversations. So when we look at buy online, pick up in store, and yes, it was a challenging time, but I think we're starting to see that now. Now the LP team is being able to get back into some of the operational aspects of the organization, and they're starting to pull back. And I don't say just LP, it's a team effort now. There's a big convergence when it comes to the cyber and the data side and the physical and the LP side. We are seeing a big convergence in cybercrime activity, account takeovers, false personas, the gift card draining and things of that. There is a large convergence of cybercrime and asset protection and theft losses. So, where can that LP/AP person, I'm not saying where, that LP/AP person has a seat at the strategic table. They could be an asset, maybe even an unknown asset in some organizations, of how much they can help to build and mitigate risk, from that enterprise security risk standpoint. And again, that's what we're having conversations with my LP leaders and our LP council is there the next evolution? Have we gone from security? When I started in 85, it was a security department.
Yep.
Then I moved to a loss prevention department. Then I moved to an asset protection department. What's the next evolution? Is it enterprise security risk? Because we're seeing it not only on the theft side, but also on the global risk, because, theft in supply chains, theft in the digital and stored value currency, the global risks, the protests, the civil unrests, coming out of COVID, we had the summer of civil unrest. Again, who was tapped on the shoulder from an intelligence standpoint, from a preparation standpoint, from a training standpoint? It was the LPAP team. Well, those events are now just happening more and more frequently for more and more reasons, whether it's directly against a U.S. brand or a U.S. banner within the U.S., or it's a U.S. banner or brand sitting in a foreign country, or it's anything that you do through that, your supply chain, your product sourcing, your travel safety program. So, I know I threw a lot out there, but it just shows how much loss prevention, asset protection in the retail environment has become more complex. It's almost like taking, the corporate security functions of manufacturing organizations and large scale Fortune, 100 companies, and bringing it down all the way to, the regional retailer.
Yeah, all great points, David. One that I discovered in a recent conversation with some guys that work for a retailer is their sense coming out of COVID is, to your point, the collaboration that used to happen. So pre-COVID, at least in my background, we were, you couldn't tell the difference between store ops and asset protection. We were in each other's meetings. We had guys that sat with the buyers for new product introduction to do the theft deterrent packaging or whatever. We were everywhere. There was no such thing as coming to a meeting and they say, "Oh Christ, here comes the LP guy." We were very much a part of the total business strategy. But the interesting comment people too made was we clearly lost that collaboration during COVID and the work from home focus. No longer, obviously, if you're working from home, it's hard to, yell over the pod wall or walk down and say, "Hey, if you got a minute, I need something real quick." That unplanned collaboration was the term they use. We're still learning how to do that at a corporate level. And I took from that, and the conversation got deeper and deeper, but it was more about, made me question, okay, so that decoupling, if you will, and doing exactly what you just mentioned, you got to have the guy at the table when the strategies are being considered, not after shit hits the fan. It's like, holy crap, where's the AP guy to stop the shrink? So there's that component, and also an increasing interest in what you mentioned earlier, supply chain as a new contributor, not new, but newly considered contributor to store level shrink. So you think about all the stuff that happened during COVID and the supply chain issues and all the ships that were off the port of Los Angeles sitting out there for months waiting to get in, and containers have always fallen off of ships, but it goes to the bottom of the ocean. The question is now becoming a bit more finite in that we got to start with when the purchase order was created. How do I know I got everything? Pick on P&G or SmithKline Beecham, pick your vendor. Doesn't matter. How do I know I got that? If it's coming out of offshore and it changes hands multiple times, 3PLs, and it's a long time before we get the FOB at the back door of Target warehousing. How do we know that? And if there are compromises anywhere in that sequence of events, and I have yet to get a clear answer to this question, it's been almost alarming, but it's an expected answer. Are the invoices ever adjusted if there's compromise in supply chain? And pretty much from talking to several 3PLs, supply chain professionals with major retailers, it's ranged from damn good question to you're probably right. In other words, they're never adjusted. If the retailer doesn't file a claim, they pay the bill. Mm-hmm. And I think since COVID, with all the supply chain problems, there is a refreshed or a new appreciation for that process as a contributor to store shrink. Because as you and all of us practitioners know, it's not always in the four walls. I mean, there's a lot more to it than just the four walls. Are you seeing your VPs, all the heavy hitters you deal with, is there now a growing appreciation for supply chain considerations, or is it still isolated? You know what? They'll fix that.
Well, I'll tell you what we're seeing is something that you also experienced is first and foremost, it's understanding that and this was part of our last National Retail Security Survey. So our last report came out, and in that question with regards to shrink, we did ask them, are these specific areas of loss part of your shrink calculation? And what we found, two areas that we've been talking about today, supply chain and e-commerce will most likely not even hit a shrink number.
Yeah.
Because again, and you said it, for many retailers, shrink exists in a four-wall environment, whether it be the four walls of the retail stores or even the four walls of your immediate distribution center or distribution channel. When you get to the supply chain aspect of it, in many instances, it falls into either a cost of goods, or if they do claim it, it goes into a claim.
Yeah.
On the e-commerce side, it most likely falls either into a cost of goods if the merchandise is lost, or on the financial sheet as a chargeback or a financial claim. Mm-hmm. So we're seeing that even today's complex retail environment, shrink has really shrunk to to an indicator, not the true indicator of using Adrian Beck's terminology, a total retail loss.
Yep.
And retailers need to look, and again, that's where getting that asset protection professional, that leader engaged in the supply chain aspects of your risk and loss, in the fraud and the e-commerce aspects of it, and everywhere, from the birth of an item in manufacturing to potentially even the end of the item, in sustainability or circularity or destruction, where is that going to impact the brand from a financial standpoint and from a loss perspective? And until we start to see more of that happening in more and more retailers, the larger organizations, as you had mentioned, the larger brands, they may have that existing already, but what about the majority of businesses which, fall in line as those medium-sized to, I will say, larger size, but smaller footprint, specialty brands, grocers, and so forth?
Yeah, it is definitely way more complex. I joined Walmart in 95, came to the home office in 96. And back then we thought we were being really innovative. And I was brought back from the field to create the merchandise systems protection team. In other words, be the liaison with all the buyers on all the high theft items and go sit down with David, the buyer, and say, hey, dude, the new whatever is coming out, in 3 months, we got to talk about the more robust packaging. We didn't even have EAS back then. That came in the late 90s. In a technology sense, are you, as who you are you seeing an increase in more innovative, less friction introducing technologies, or are you seeing we're still heavily weighted on legacy dependence, i.e. lock and show cases, cops at the door, all the stuff we've done since before you and I were in retail? Are you seeing an emergence of startups and fresh thought?
We are definitely seeing, more and more new technologies and new industry partners coming to the plate with a new look or a new design in some things. Yes, I believe that the retailers, for the most part, they are still today reliant on, the protective measures to, again, stop the bleed,
Yep.
stop what's happening now, right? Because when you're seeing a shelf sweep of items under $20 or under $10, how are you going to stop that?
Yeah.
Yes, you can, right? But we are starting to see, the use of RFID, the use of artificial intelligence, the other piece is the integration capabilities of numerous technologies to be able to work together. And I think
Yep.
AI with multimodality as a concept
Sure.
is going to be able to expand that, so that you know my cameras can talk to my EAS system, can talk to my RFID, can talk to my POS, and I'll be able to extract and be able to analyze information at a much faster rate. So we are starting to see a lot of those technologies come into place. RFID, I think, is something that is, again, a lot of retailers are using it from an inventory management perspective. Are we starting to see some? We are starting to see some use, place readers at the exits, but are we also looking at it at the point of sale system? Because if I can see that the product came from the manufacturer to my front door in a retail environment and all
Yeah.
places in between, and I can see that the product leaves the building, where do I see whether that product was bought or not,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
And that doesn't even just only have a loss prevention component. Think about it beyond the sale. Think about a return aspect of it. Think about a circularity or a sustainability aspect of it. Then you think about the asset protection, perspective of, okay, the item is gone and it could have been stolen. Can I ID it in an investigation? But we try to look at, and I have a lot of conversations with my peer in sustainability
Hmm.
and reverse logistics, because I find that stuff
Yeah.
fascinating, because it has a complete role in what we're trying to do from a protection standpoint and just an overall, retail operations excellence. So, we are starting to see more integration of technologies, AI, RFID, some new, even locked cases. That's another one. They may not go away, but can the locked cases be self-servicing? And we're
Yeah.
starting to see that with some providers, where if I'm part of your loyalty program, can I use my loyalty app to unlock a case that doesn't require an employee to come and help service me? That
Yeah.
right there is a reduction in labor, a service to the customer, a protection of product. Self-checkout. You talked about, an organization that is helping retailers on the self-checkout side to make sure that item scans, or, if this item can't be scanned because of a challenging UPC or barcode, is there an indicator light that shines that
Yep.
allows the employee to come over and say, can I help you? So I have that, we have to look at how are these technologies, but again, there's a lot going on today that's still keeping us,
Yep.
focused on I'm not going to say rudimentary, because they're not rudimentary, but the legacy measures.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the frustrations from internal, and I don't know if you in your background would have had these similar frustrations, that when new technologies are introduced, so I, as the AP guy, go out and I go to DARPA or whoever and figure these things out and introduce them. The internal roadblocks are as challenging, if not more so, than finding the emerging technology. In that, in my past, the dreaded 8-word phrase was nice solution, but we can do that internally, which was, and I can say this, is crap. Um, Maybe you could if you had a dedicated team and you were going to do it right and you were going to keep it plugged in and do the iterative improvements that a third party will do because that's their bread and butter. Um, so I can't blame the provider community 100% for lack of innovation and new technologies because they're out there. When I go to EuroShop or EuroSys in Dusseldorf in February, a lot of startups are over there. There are plenty of, not plenty, there are a number of innovative solutions out there that do not introduce friction to the honest customer that are always going to be hard sells if it's a SaaS solution or if it's AI, and what I call the sexiness factor. If it's a sexy solution, the chances of getting that into retail and past the tech guys are slim because it's something that appeals to them like, ooh, you can do that, so can we. And then in my experience, I rarely, if ever, saw that successfully accomplished. The third party was always the better. Do you sense any of that in your conversations that they just can't get their companies to adopt?
I think what we're seeing more of today, Brand, is the roadblocks of, and it's also one of the key differences here in the United States versus other countries is a lot of the issues around privacy and data sharing. It's not so much that we can do it better. I think that a lot of the LP leaders and organizations, there's concern over all of the privacy legislation that's taking place and things with regards to, even AI, again, we talk AI and you said, whatever that is, you're exactly right.
Yeah.
Nobody really knows or understands what AI is, but the amount of legislation at the federal level and state level that's already been introduced to prevent it is already caused concern. We're involved in that. From a privacy perspective, from even the ability to use existing systems today to help benefit the customer, the employee, and the organization, that are we going to start backtracking because, we don't have the right guardrails in place or we don't have the right provisions? We're just all afraid of this. You see camera technology, facial recognition, body-worn cameras, being used in other countries. Retailers are interested in that stuff here in the U.S.
Yeah.
It's just that the retail, to talk to your IT team, you mentioned biometric facial recognition, that's a non-starter right there. The hand comes up, there's no conversation. We're trying to, again, that's another role for us where we are starting more and more to bring the LP technology providers to the privacy attorneys, to the IT teams. I'm working with my peers at the NRF who are working with our collective membership. It's something we're doing this year at NRF Protect in June, where law and risk are coming together and we have specific workshops.
Oh, that's awesome.
To talk about, and we have providers and retailers who are going to be talking about, hey, this is the value of a facial recognition system. This is the value of data sharing as an investigative and benchmarking tool. Let's have the conversation and say, what are we afraid of, or what are the big concerns, or how do we overcome those obstacles? And if it has to be legislation, then that's the role of the NRF in support of the industry. But if it's just education, awareness, and understanding, then we hope to be able to break those barriers down for more and more retailers so that they can start looking at these emerging technologies, so that, to your point, we can get ahead of the curve now, or at least in front of, the legacy systems that may not be entirely perfect today, but we can use today's technological advancements to either alter those or bring in new opportunities with new providers and technologies.
That's a really good point, a segue from, a collective concern of retailers that you guys pick it up if it becomes a legislative effort. And let's go back to privacy. So I had a couple of projects, and I won't mention the providers' names, but everything operationally worked. We would put it in a handful of stores. It was awesome. Then we started running the gauntlet of the 87 different departments and approval meetings you had to go through, and it usually got gummed up in either privacy or largely it was privacy and legal. And we had an awesome lawyer, love him like a brother, Art Little. He's no longer with Walmart, but he was our LP lawyer forever. And he was really good at looking at a solution, taking the time to go to the store and look at it. And he would very quickly segment, okay, there's nothing wrong with this. It's a business decision. Or he would say, okay, here's a train you're going to have to engage with, whether it's tomorrow or 2 years from now. You're going to see it from a legal perspective. He was very good at not being Dr. No and just saying, oh, no, 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 we can't do that because there's a 1 in 70 million chance that somebody will do X. He looked beyond all that. Um, but my point is to exactly what you said, it never occurred to me that, you know what, if I'm having that problem with whatever technology and its privacy and we're gummed up, let me go to Mike Lamb at Kroger before he retired, or Paul Jekyll, or Gary Smith, you name them, and see if we can get some agreement to say, hey, David, we have a concern. How do we get around this? And then it becomes a legislative effort, because I did have two technologies that were an absolute hard stop no because of privacy. Had nothing to do whether it worked or not, or did it perform? Could it have moved the needle? Hell yes, it could have, but it stopped cold on privacy. So that's interesting. I'm glad you said that, because that really is a major function, if not the most important function of trade orgs, is to represent all of us and go do the heavy lift inside the Beltway. We have a couple of minutes left, David. I want to kind of get your view on the future. So we've talked a lot about your and my's combined 60, 70 years in the industry. What do you see on the horizon, both in terms of tech, but more importantly, what do you think is going to change in the industry in, pick a number, 5 years, whatever? What are you most excited about, I guess, is the best way to phrase it.
Well, if I can, what I'd love to do in my role here with the NRF, before, as you said, with my many years before I decide to be someone like Mike Lamb and be able to retire.
Yeah, we hope he's retired
or retire again or whatever.
Yeah,
Mike. So I give Mike is great. I'm thankful for everything he's done for the industry. But as I look at it, Brand, I think that again, we are going to solve the problem that we see today with regards to the theft in the ORC. I came on board to the NRF as an opportunity for me to give back to an industry that, like many, I didn't start thinking about this industry until I kind of fell into it, and the career it's given me and what I've been able to do, the people, the friendships, all that stuff there. But we have this problem, this organized retail crime problem, this theft, this safety problem. We're going to get over that. But I do think that where we are going to have to start really looking is, again, the LPAP world needs to take a future look, needs to take a global look, and I was fortunate in my career to have that global outlook and that experience with my prior organization and being able to be the one that looked at how something in Asia can impact us, or a conflict in Europe could have great impact to the supply chain or anything else. We have to really expand our view and our horizon and start really focusing on what's next, what's going to impact us, and I was a student of international security studies for my master's program. And I bring that up because that really gave me a very good global view of, how is climate change going to impact the world?
Oh, wow.
My thesis was on the Arctic, and how is the Arctic going to open up shipping lanes that could somehow create a new global power shift from China and Russia because of their ability to come over the North Sea, right? So, I think we have to look at what is that total holistic enterprise look of risk and be the new risk leaders, focusing on or including asset protection and loss prevention and physical security. But we need to start building those stronger relationships with our enterprise risk managers, those individuals who are looking at it, because everything we see now, brand, operational, financial, reputational, there's a security component to it.
Yep.
And, weather events, protests, civil, you name it, we're starting to see more and more safety and security involved in it. And I think that's what we have to look at for the future. And we have to look at it from what can help us from a technological standpoint. Again, I think RFID is going to be very similar to, the UPC code and,
Yep.
EAS, right? Costs are going to come down. We're going to start seeing, is it a standard across? AI is going to start helping us to, do a lot more with less, but there still has to
Yeah.
be that human element and engagement. Um, Retailer is always going to evolve. It's an evolving industry. It's an exciting industry. We as risk leaders now need to be the ones to start thinking about, okay, what's next, right? And I'll just end with, we all had pandemic plans,
Yeah.
before COVID, but our
Yeah.
pandemic was, okay, the bird flu
Yep.
or something
That's
else.
right. That's
You
exactly
know,
right.
what's that next pandemic?
Yeah.
Because, we've got to think that way. We've got to think more future.
I I 100% agree with you. And, kind of the way I've always phrased it is, listening to the earnings calls and, having all the friends that I do across the industry and going to the trade shows is the offline questions I can ask the guys, because obviously if they're on the clock somewhere, they're not going to answer this. Is this our Sputnik moment in the industry? Have we been pushed against the wall hard enough that the finance guys, the privacy guys, logistics, supply, all the ancillary players are now mainstream and we're like, enough. If I'm, for example, Doug McMillan at Walmart, enough, guys. We cannot continue on this trajectory of loss and risk. So we're going to do something very different and not give you another $100,000 for more padlocks, but we're going to give you 100 million and put it into a black ops budget. And your non-traditional guys, your players need to go out and start ferreting out these technologies and look for it. I'm cautiously optimistic. I haven't yet seen that aggressive, pivot, but I was very fortunate in my tenure to have several VPs. I had 8 total that very uncharacteristically would allow me to go play in non-traditional sandbox, like go to DARPA or NIST or Caltech, when most people would be like, what in the hell are you doing? That is not our problem. And in the early days, it was JP Suarez. I don't know if you remember him. Monica Mullins, Mike Lamb to a degree, depending, they allowed that flexibility, because without a leader that says, I got to have a team or at least a person that I take the leash off and you go where most people don't and find this stuff, and let's start planting seeds. So to your point, I think we got more growth in that respect, to take the handcuffs off and give a longer leash. We are bumping up on the hour, David. I could do this for another 3 hours and probably another 8 hours with a beer. But I greatly appreciate it, dude. These are healthy conversations for the broader industry. And again, our listeners are all over the globe. So my ask of you is, I'm sure you're okay with it, if our listeners ever have questions or want to get more information from you, you'd be okay with that?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay.
They can reach me at, Johnston, Johnston, first initial D at nrf.com.
Great. Okay. Well, I greatly appreciate it, dude. You have a great weekend and we'll be in touch soon. I
Yeah.
appreciate it, man. See
Thanks,
you.
Brand. Appreciate the
Thank
talk.
you.